Hi there, welcome back to another review, this time of the underrated sequel, Short Circuit 2, which I honestly liked more than the first movie. I didn't think it was overwhelmingly better than the first film by any means. I thought it was marginally better, but I just felt Short Circuit 2 had more working parts to me. There was more for Johnny Five to see and do. I thought the character of Ben was actually a character and actually felt like a real human being in this movie. It was actually very likable, and I thought Fisher Stevens did a great job in this movie. I liked Michael McKean. He started out as a character who's kind of, he was kind of a, sleazy kind of guy who's willing to sell Johnny Five, and then he becomes a likable, charming guy by the end of the movie, who forms a pretty good bond with Johnny Five. By the end of the film, I thought it actually had established villains. Now they weren't necessarily intimidating, but they honestly, at least I felt like they were a threat. At least I didn't really feel that way about G.W. Bailey and anyone from Nova Robotics from the first film. I thought the screenplay was honestly better than the first movie. It was funnier. It had, like I said, it had more for Johnny Five to see and do. Johnny Five in the City was a fun thing to see. I thought it had more. There was more tension in it. I thought the film was better paced than the first movie. I really enjoyed this film. Actually, I don't even honestly I'd say I think it's marginally better than the first film. I think it's a whole step better than the first movie. This is honestly one of my favorite sequels after watching it again. I have very fond memories of seeing the ending, with Bonnie Tyler's I Need a Hero in the background, when Johnny's trying to stop the bank robber guy. And I remember that very fondly. But I actually, after watching this again, I don't even think I even saw the whole thing. I think I just saw bits and pieces when I was a kid, and I remember the I need a hero. It's gotta be fast and he's gotta be cool and he's gotta be larger than life. Larger than life. Do, 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 do. So that's like the first time I heard that song. I know it wasn't Footloose and it was a bunch of other movies before Short Circuit 2, but I thought it was for Short Circuit 2. That's what I thought for the longest time until I found out it was originally on the soundtrack for Footloose. I honestly think it works better for Short Circuit 2. So it was fun to hear that song. That sequence is watching that whole sequence again was a total nostalgia rush. It was just a blast from the past that I love seeing. And I guess this movie just more my cup of tea. Yeah, it's longer than the first film. The first film's only about 99 minutes, and this is 111 minutes. But I still thought this film had just the pacing was much better to me personally. It had a faster pace to it. There was more going on. There was more for Johnny Five to do. It was interesting. It was fun to see him in the city with all this new massive amount of input. I liked the whole subplot with Ben trying to build these little mini Johnny Five toys. I would love to have one. I would have loved to have one as a kid. And I even like Cynthia Gibb's character. Mainly her character is just this sweet, kind, girl who works for who's struggling to try to, find a toy design, a successful toy design, and she falls, and she ends up coming into the presence of Ben and his Johnny Five replica toys, and makes a deal with him and Michael McKean's character, and whose his character's name is Fred. And and then she develops a little bit of a romance with Ben, which I thought was it was sweet. And I actually thought they had better chemistry than Ali Sheedy and Steve Guttenberg did in the first movie because they didn't really have a lot of moments. That's one thing I didn't mention in my review of the first film I thought I'd just throw out here. It just I didn't really feel like they really fell in love. Here, I totally bought it. I bought that Ben had feelings for Cynthia Gibb's character, Sandy Banatoni. And I love the fact that she was really into music, and it tied into a very clever way of how Fisher Stevens, how Ben and Fred used Morse code in order for Sandy to find their location. And I thought that was very clever, very ingenious. Never seen that done before. To use Morse code, with music. That's what it is. It was music tunes, and it was a way to kind of get Sandy to recognize the lyrics that then tied in and made it sort of a riddle to find out where they are. I love that. I thought it was great. It was really unique. This film has the most powerful and gripping sequence in the entire franchise. The scene where Johnny Five gets vandalized, gets beat up, gets smashed. Very powerful sequence that really tugs at your heartstrings, really messes me up inside. The whole scene, I was like, no, Johnny. Johnny, because I actually have grown to love this character, this robot, just like I would, a friend of mine, or or another human being. So that was really tough to sit to watch to see Johnny get beat up. It's directed by Kenneth Johnson, who before this he did a lot of episodes of V and a few other movies. He didn't really do a lot of movies. This is one of his big. It was like one of the first films that he directed. I think he did a few things before, but it was mostly TV. And I thought he did a great job. This direction is full of energy and life, and I love the way he shoots the opening credits with this little mini Johnny Five going around, rolling around in this office building. I love the way that that's shot. And you could tell that this guy knew what he was doing. He knew how to shoot the scenes with the robot. He knew how to handle this big city and to shoot things in a certain way. And yeah, I mean, it was a really he did a great job. I think it's a very underrated directing job by Kenneth Johnson. Sadly, he wouldn't go on to do much. Did not go on to do much after this. He directed Steel with Shaquille O'Neal, which was a really awful movie. Now that's a total pile of scrap. That's absolutely scrap metal. But I don't really feel that way about Short Circuit 2. I don't. I think the screenplay by Brent Maddock and S.S. Wilson is better than the screenplay in the first movie. There's some nice little things in here. Johnny learning to become more human, learning to deal with rejection from other humans, feeling like an outsider, like an outcast, feeling the emotions of being lonely, and the whole stuff where you get to see him angry. I love that. You saw him angry in the first film, but here he gets like revenge. He gets all like he puts like a mohawk on his head and gets like chains around his waist like he's Rambo and goes and kicks some ass. And really doesn't like kick ass in a way. Doesn't like punch anybody or whatever. But he goes in and gets revenge and catches the bad guy in a fun sequence that is actually really suspenseful and has a lot of tension to it because Johnny's running out of power. And if he runs out of power, then well, Johnny's dead. And we definitely don't want that to happen. Because just like the first film, he's he's the best character in the movie. Um, every scene that he's in is pure magic. But unlike the first film, I thought that the other supporting characters were just as likable to me. I loved Fisher Stevens in this. And I also really like Michael McKean. I like him as an actor anyway, so it's fun to see him and interact with Johnny Five. And like I was saying, the script has this other good stuff, like the scene where Johnny goes into a church and he has confession, and the priest is when he finds out he's a machine, is like, "Get out of here!" You need to, if you're going to confess, you need to do it yourself. And it's this whole sort of thing, not have a robot do it. It is. It's like Johnny isn't treated like it's like he's a foreigner. It's like he's treated like he's from another country, and that's why he has a real connection with Ben, and they create a real friendship with one another in this movie. And it's honestly really believable. I thought so as well. So the villain, Jack Weston, this is one of his last films he did. He plays Oscar. He's not intimidating, but he's the type of villain that is a real scumbag because he's a liar, he's a cheat, he's a swindler, and he's also the type of guy who is really personable. He comes across as a very likable old man who builds this little sort of friendship with Johnny and but absolutely uses him and abuses him for financial gain. So he's like the worst type of individual. And there's these other guys, supporting guys, is playing these sort of henchmen who are do their jobs all right. And Ali Sheedy herself actually does lend her voice in one scene, an uncredited scene, but she has a little bit of a presence in this. Apparently, the studio wanted Steve Guttenberg to commit to the film without a screenplay, but he refused. And so they said, all right, whatever, I guess you're not going to be in the movie. And the screenplay turned out pretty well, I honestly thought. So, sometimes when you commit to a film without a screenplay, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Gutenberg himself has expressed in an interview that he regretted turning down the chance to star in this film. But I think it works out well because Ben's character gets fleshed out more, and I like the dynamic that Johnny has with Ben in this. It was a fun little scene where he's relaying, trying to give him dating advice to try to, find a way to get him to communicate with Cynthia Gibb's character, and it's pretty good. It's good fun, clever with the way that he's able to communicate to Ben by using the giant billboards, in Times Square and things like that. And yeah, and I guess the scene where Oscar and his thugs attack and smash Johnny Five to pieces was voted online as one of the saddest film scenes of all time. It's true. It really does. It grabs you. It rips your heart out, and then and it's so sad. And then, but he gets put back together and stops the bad guys, and it's a fun scene, and there's a lot of stuff. Johnny Five goes through a lot of different character arcs in this. He evolves. He learns. He's gullible, but that's understandable. But then he learns from that. He learns, what's right and wrong. And at first he's starting out, he's jacking car stereos, and you know, for helping out Los Locos band. And I love this scene where he comes back and he's all like, comes back to the warehouse, which is his home technically in this movie for the most part, and he's all like, "Los Locos kick your ass! Los Locos!" He's like, "Los Locos kick your ass! Los Locos kick your face! Los Locos kick your balls into outer space!" It's just how it's funny because of how endearing and how just brutally honest Johnny Five is when he's saying those sort of things. We're talking to these, the store clerk when he goes and finds this world's big, the huge bookstore, and he's like, "Two excellent books. May I have these, craphead?" It's just kind of fun stuff like that. And just talking about this movie really puts a smile on my face. I really enjoyed this movie a lot. The first film I find entertaining and it's fun, but I honestly, for the most part, really liked Short Circuit 2. Um, I love the scene where Oscar's thinking he's getting away in the boat, and Johnny Five is like, "Oscar, you will not get away. I am really pissed off." Yeah, I know some people would consider it corny or cheesy, but I really enjoy this movie. I know a lot of critics didn't like it. They thought it was worse than the first film. But interestingly enough, though, Siskel and Ebert, who didn't care for the first movie, they called the film even better than the original. And in a Los Angeles Times article, I think it was Ebert, he noted that Wilson and Maddock have improved considerably here. Their construction is more deft, their dialogue is better, and they make number five come more alive. And I agree. I do. That's one of the instances. That's one of the many instances where I agree with Siskel and Ebert. There's times where we disagree, but for the most part, they tend to have a lot of they and I kind of share similar, especially Roger Ebert when it comes to the type of films that we enjoy or the type of films that we don't. And the score by Charles Fox, I like it. I think the score is pretty underrated too. I like the score. I enjoy the score. It's catchy in its own right. I think the editing was great by Conrad Bluff the Fourth. Another reason why the scenes with Johnny Five come alive is because of the editing. I mean, these movies need great editing to make them work out so well, and thankfully they both have great editing. And the movie wasn't a hit. It made like 21.6 million. I don't know how big the budget was, but it really was a disappointment in the box office, considering how big of a hit the first film was. And I don't understand why. Maybe it's just a competition. I don't know. Maybe Steve Guttenberg wasn't in it. Fisher Stevens wasn't a big enough star. but I think honestly think it deserved to make more money. So there really wasn't a third film that was made. They were planning on maybe doing a third one, and there's a script that actually was made, but they just didn't feel it was effective enough, so it was dropped. And then there was like another reboot remake that they were kind of thinking about doing that was like a darker film in tone, which I don't understand that. A gritty a gritty remake of Short Circuit? No, thank you. And didn't they kind of already do that with Chappie? Which I still haven't seen, by the way, but I already kind of feel like I already saw it because it seems like it's just Short Circuit with annoying rappers turned actors. Eh, and just something it just takes itself more seriously than Short Circuit did, or the sequel. But yeah, and there was also apparently there's an educational movie. It's which is kind of Short Circuit 3. It's called Hot Cars, Cold Facts, and it was made in 1990, and it's a short educational film which features the character of Johnny Five. Tim Blaney doesn't come back and voice the robot, unfortunately. Of course, he came back for Short Circuit 2 and just did an amazing job as usual. He picked up where he left off with his work in the first film, and here it's voiced by Russell Turner, and it takes place directly after Short Circuit 2, so it's essentially a sequel. It's Short Circuit 3. I know when I first heard about this, I was like, what? And I probably will watch that pretty soon, and I might do like a first time viewing video about it or something because I've never seen it before, and I think it would be really kind of interesting to just watch this and just it's kind of great. I mean, wow, there technically is a Short Circuit 3. Uh, the plot I thought was I enjoyed. I thought it was more interesting. I liked the whole stuff with the toys, trying to, build the toys. Johnny Five comes in from Montana and helps Ben and Fred, put these toys together. And there's this sort of drama going on where there's these robbers who have taken up shop in the factory that they've rented to build these toys in. And you have the stuff where there's a little bit of tension between Michael McKean and Fisher Stevens, and eventually they become good friends though. There's the whole sort of dynamic between Cynthia Gibb and Ben, her character, Sandy. And then there's the stuff where Johnny, they're trying to keep him in the warehouse so he doesn't go crazy with all this input. And they try to trick him into thinking he's not in the city. But of course, he finds out it is, and then he's just going around and having a good time in the city and enjoying himself. And people are judging him by the way he looks, and that affects him emotionally. He gets in trouble with the police, and there's just a lot of stuff that happens in the movie. I thought so anyway. There's the the soul stuff where he realizes that Fred is trying to sell him, and he falls out the window, and a pretty cool, great effect. He used a hang glider to fly around the city. Cinematography in that scene is really really nice as well, and build up this whole thing where this guy he thought he was a friend of his is betraying him and makes him dig a hole and cut open a hole into the safe in the bank so the guy can get away and steal the jewels. And earlier, his henchmen are all trying to get Ben and Fred out of the warehouse and trying to like attack them. And Johnny Five is a fun scene where he attacks them and throws them out of the warehouse. I love the scene where he sets up a trap for them. So they try to break in earlier and like the place on fire, but then a trap gets set that throws them out of the building. And then Johnny had set up this message that I recorded that he's just all like, "Bad guys are here, attention to everybody that's in the near vicinity. The bad guys are here, criminals, bad guys, thieves." Just always listing off all these different, felons. They're right over here. And then of course, the bad guys have to get in the car and drive off because of the attention that's being thrown their way. And then, of course, you have that scene, the very tragic, just emotionally powerful scene where the bad guys, they trick Johnny Five, they use Pig Latin, and he can't understand it, and they use it to communicate, and they get up behind him, and they just hit him with axes and hit him with this, with a crowbar. It's just such a powerful scene. It's just so sad, and then just seeing Johnny just sputtering along while he's all broken, his arm is gone, and his eye is hanging out, and he's bleeding battery acid that looks a lot like blood. It's a very sad scene. And it's a very powerful scene because you built such an emotional attachment with this machine. And Michael McKean has to find a way to use these Radio Shack parts, and with not a lot of time remaining, to help fix Johnny enough so that he can fix himself. He does. It shows a change of attitude, gets a mohawk, becomes a little, gets pissed off and goes after the bad guys with I Need a Hero in the background. Even before that, he actually goes and faces off with the guys who beat him up and takes them out. And then he goes after Oscar, and that's a fun scene where, we got I Need a Hero, and Johnny, gets Oscar, and he's busted, and then Johnny actually looks like he potentially dies. It runs out of power, and he dies. And he gets brought back to life, though, by, of all things, a defibrillator that a lot of people use to bring humans back to life. And it brings Johnny back to life. And then you have like this really kind of cornball ending, I have to admit, where he gets an upgrade. He's all like, he's got gold solid plating, and I'm like, I don't really care for that. I like his design where he's not gold, and it's kind of tacky. So he's like, oh, he's all gold, solid gold now, and there's this huge ceremony that makes him a robot citizen. And how do you feel, Johnny? I feel alive. He jumps in the air, and then I'm like, that is kind of corny, I have to admit. Um, but other than, there's not, I don't really have that many problems with this movie. It's that ending, which is a bit too cornball. I would have just had him, he gets fixed up, but he looks like he normally does. You have the stuff with the Input Incorporated Toy Company. You have instead of a robot citizenship ceremony, it's a give him a medal, for being a hero, and they give him a key to the city. He doesn't necessarily have to become an official citizen to be respected and appreciated, as much as any of these other real humans. Because and it wouldn't be as corny or as ridiculous, because that's kind of ridiculous. Robot citizenship, parade at the end of the movie. But here there's a little bit more, understated. And I know the film's kind of silly anyway, but that felt like it jumped the shark. It just went way over the shark with that moment. But, there's other than that, I really don't have that many problems with it. I think there's a couple more, there's a little bit too much cornball for me at times. Um, and, I didn't really care for the robot citizenship ending, with solid gold Johnny 5. It would have been nice to see the Goot. But other than that, I really don't have that many issues with this movie at all, really. So to be honest, I just thought it was really a lot of fun. I thought it was fast paced, it had really likable characters, a cool concept. Um, the idea, thing with Johnny in the city, with a lot of input, and the effects of Johnny 5 were on point, were fantastic as usual. And Tim Blaney did great voice work, really brought the character to life. And like I said, I thought the screenplay was better than the first film. I thought the film was better paced. I thought for the most part, the characters, the supporting cast was better here. I thought it had actual villains, unlike the first movie. And yeah, I just thought it was more interesting. Johnny 5 had more to do, more to see, more input. And yeah, I really don't have that much negative input to provide when it comes to this movie. I know it wasn't a hit financially and critically; it didn't do that well. But to me, this definitely, let's just say, it warmed my heart. It entertained me, and I really liked it. I think this is a very underrated, undervalued, overlooked sequel. I don't think it's nearly as shitty as people make it out to be. And I honestly, if you thought it was not that great, I recommend you give it another watch sometime. Because I honestly think, it's worth at least another shot if you weren't necessarily the biggest fan of it the first time around. This movie, though, I really enjoy it. And I think it's a great sequel. It's a stellar sequel. It's a spectacular sequel. I don't know what else to say about Short Circuit 2. I pretty much, you know, covered all my circuits, covered all the things, said all the things that I wanted to say about it. And yeah, uh, I don't know what to say because we're rated on 5 stars. I would give it 4.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it that much. I know some people would say it's a bit too high of a rating for this movie, but you know what? It's my channel and this is my opinion, and I really, really liked this sequel for the most part. Like I said, I only had very few negative things to say about it, and I mean that. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a step up from the first film, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, sound like a broken record. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Malfunction, malfunction. But anyway, yeah. Thanks for watching my review of Short Circuit 2. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I will see you guys later. See ya.